Usually takes just a bit for everything to tell everything.
Something I've actually never done is a Facebook Live.
Never.
Never.
Wimp.
I prefer the term Luddite.
Oh boy.
Something I've actually...
You're hearing it repeat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's not deja vu. You're not insane either.
That's all right. I'm used to turning out the voices.
We are live, just so you know. One of the neat things, too, is if we get anybody, it happens every once in a while where people are kind of interacting.
Oh, sure.
I can see that. I don't want to do too much of that because we're also doing this. But if it's good, it might, who knows? The Lord is
We'll take
up to something. I'll take his direction.
We'll take some feedback.
Yeah. All right. You ready?
Let's do it.
Here we go. Hey, y'all. Pastor Emil here with another episode of Sweet Jesus. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Ice cream is sweet, but Jesus is far, far sweeter. And I am here again with my brother Brock Kane. We are going through sort of a digital confirmation program, making available sort of the basics of Christianity, and we're starting out with these prerequisites that we've been going through. Tim Keller had these talks at Oxford University, and he talked about 5 things that Jesus offers, 5 things about a life that Jesus offers that are reasons to at least begin to explore Christianity, even if you haven't, right? So before you even start to ask questions, you got to wonder why you should even care. And that's what we've been going through. We've been talking about meaning and purpose, satisfaction, identity, freedom. Today we are talking about hope. This idea that we are actually hope-based creatures, whether we like it or not. We need hope, and we look for hope, or we live without hope, and we do that to our own detriment, but we need hope. That's the case he makes. And Christianity provides a hope that nothing can provide. There's nothing else out there that provides the kind of hope that we need desperately as human beings. So Brock and I, we're just going to talk about that, and hopefully that's helpful for you. Got a comment in the live feed on Facebook with a link to the YouTube video on this, the talk that Tim Keller did. So check that out, and of course, like, share, subscribe, all those wonderful things. But Brock, well, we were talking a little bit ahead of time, and you said that you felt this was like the most compelling.
I really did. I thought Keller really just sort of went to the heart of the issue directly with this one. And it's interesting how you framed the topics that he addresses in these discussions, these talks at Oxford. They are, what are these topics about? Hope, freedom, identity, purpose. Are these Christian subjects, or are they human subjects? I think it is how Christianity addresses human need. And I think Keller kind of addresses that. But if we look at this subject of hope from that standpoint and understand that this idea of hope, of looking to the future to give us some context for understanding today and moving forward, it is a fundamental human thing. And it is as Keller describes in the video, which I highly encourage all of your listeners to watch, it is kind of the fundamental Christian answer to human need, I think.
Yeah. We need hope. We need some sense that there is something better. I don't know if I got it down in my notes or not. Oh, he tells this story a little bit later on. He does a whole bunch in the beginning, but then at some point, kind of the midpoint, he talks about Edgar Allan Poe. And this poem, The Raven and Nevermore, it's kind of a refrain.
Right.
And he does qualify it a little bit by saying, hey, I'm not a literary critic, so I don't know if this is actually what the guy was saying, but I get the sense that what he's saying in that poem with this refrain, Nevermore, is that there's this irretrievability of life, a kind of death in the midst of life, that there is this hopelessness in life. And later on, when he talks about the resurrection, there are a lot of people that will just say, well, the resurrection isn't a fact so much as it's this thing to tell us that there's hope.
It's an allegory.
In every situation, there's always a silver lining. There's always the possibility of hope. And he's very dark response, basically saying, no, that's not actually how life is. Sometimes life just really sucks.
Yeah.
and it doesn't get any better. And there is no, rainbow around the corner.
It's very inspiring. You should all go watch it right
now. But it's true. Like, there's so many things that, we have hoped for. I have hoped for that never really came. But the hope that they would come, got me far enough to get to the next day, right? So we have this little trickle of things that, that is constantly coming, and we never take time to recognize that they never come, and we're just really hoping in something else, when really what Jesus provides is this everlasting hope, this true hope that doesn't disappoint, that is far better than anything else that you can have out in front of you, no matter whether or not, we hope people listen to this thing, but what if nobody does? Well, we still have the hope of Jesus, right? That's the bigger hope that anchors us in something like that. Or I hope that my vacation, my upcoming vacation, is going to be just wonderful and relaxing.
Not a single email or text message from work.
Not a single one of those. And the kids are going to be perfect in the car. We're just going to have this wonderful, like, Little House on the Prairie, kumbaya kind of moment. We're going to see other family, right? And none of that ever happens.
We love to delude ourselves, don't we?
And none of that ever happens. And yet we keep going on vacation.
And
we keep looking forward to vacation as that hope.
We have this built-up notion or idea that we've placed on a pedestal that we aspire to. It's we do it with our careers, with everything we aspire to in life.
Yeah. Yep. And they always disappoint us. Oh, but Jesus doesn't. And he proves that to us in the resurrection. He tells this one story. I don't know, how helpful did you think this story was? The one with the two guys in the room, where one guy, they're doing this menial task, same people, same temperament, same everything, identical subjects, identical situations, and they're doing this menial task, and you tell one of them, hey, at the end of a year doing this 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 7 days a week, I forget what he said, I'll pay you, well, he says 10,000 pounds, but $20,000 or $50,000. And then he tells the other guy, hey, I'm going to give you $50 million at the end of this. And, they get together for lunch. They only get 30 minutes, but during their break, one guy looks at the other, hey, man.
Isn't this awful?
Isn't this awful? I think I'm going to quit. What about you? No, it's
the easiest
amazing
thing I've ever done.
I love this job. And that's hope, right? The guy has got this expectation that what I'm doing, while it's painful and difficult and just so full of tedious stuff, I'm going to stick it out because there's $50 million waiting for me at the end. I would stick it out 10 hours a day. If you want to pay me to fold papers 10 hours a day for 5 days a week for the next year for $50 million,
just point to where they are.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
You think that was a helpful story?
Actually, I thought it was very helpful because he starts the discussion talking about how he describes human beings as hope-based creatures. It's just sort of interwoven in our DNA somehow. And I didn't quite know where he was going with that until he told that story. And I had not thought about our existence as so reliant on hope until he put it into that context. You know, how do I endure the struggles of the daily grind of my life, the bigger challenges that I'll face? How do I look at those things and come to a conclusion? There is something of a reward on the around this curve, you know, in my journey. And I don't know. I couldn't tell you where that idea comes from. You know, how do I face, life's obstacles and challenges? And sometimes we don't call it hope. You know, we have other words that we use. We talk about optimism sometimes, you know.
Looking forward to something.
Right. But even that, I think, has a different context to it. Would I describe myself as an optimistic person? Not all the time.
You're Lutheran.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to be.
No. I convince myself I'm a realist, a pragmatist.
The glass is twice as big as it needs to be.
It's a glass. Or something, you know. But nevertheless, once he framed it in that context, and I started looking at my life, I'm thinking, well, yeah, if you think about it from that point of view, I am a hopeful creature, you know, because there's so much about, you know, the future that I know can be so sweet. And even when, you know, the moment disappoints, there's still sometimes the hope itself is the reward.
Yeah. You know, I had the same kind of reaction to the first time I heard this, that I was not thinking I was a hope-based creature, that I didn't think of it in those terms, but somehow it rang true. It resonated. And what I think that tells me, sort of a tangent, you know, we don't have to go down a rabbit hole with this necessarily, but he is trying to communicate to people that don't know Jesus. And somehow when he communicates with people that don't know Jesus, he is striking a chord with Christians.
Yeah, very much so.
And there's actually a lecture he gave to some kind of group on, you know, leading a missional church, something like that. And he actually says explicitly, like, you talk to people as if they're not converted, sort of, I think the way he framed it. And then suddenly you find yourself with people that aren't Christians that show up. And I think, you know, we spend a lot of time talking to our audience. They teach you that at the seminary, you know, consider your audience. But who do we want our audience to be is maybe something we should also consider. And I'm not very good at that, but I'm trying. Well, and that's part of what this is all about.
I think that's I think that's well said. And you're right. At the seminary, they do teach us to, I think, stack knowledge, you know, and treat our audience accordingly. You know, well, you've been members of our congregation for a number of years now. You've heard me speak about these things, so you've now integrated that, you know, and we can talk about other things, you know, maybe. But as you said with this issue of hope, and when he hits this nerve, he's hitting a nerve with all humanity, Christian and non-Christian alike. Yeah. And so perhaps when we talk to Christians, we should be reaching out for that nerve that all human beings have.
Yeah.
And coding that with our Christian message.
A lot of the people that he reads and quotes, you know, C.S. Lewis, David Martin Lloyd Jones is a guy he quotes a lot. Charles Taylor, I think he's Catholic. Martin Lloyd Jones is Anglican, maybe, from England at least.
N.T. Wright.
N.T. Wright, British guy. And they are all some of the great apologists. They're the people throughout history that have done such a good job of looking at the world and figuring out the language of the world and then communicating in that language so that the world might hear it. Not, hey, here's what I got, here's what I learned in church and seminary, so here it is, and if you get it, great. If you don't, well, maybe you should try harder.
Well, right. You'll get a better grade.
Yeah.
And what do many of those people have in common? They experienced a conversion, not of faith, or not only of faith, but of faith and understanding later in life.
Yeah.
And these are people who have fully experienced and embraced both sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you almost need that in a way to be able to effectively communicate what this hope is.
Just having this conversation, it's dawning on me that I think that's one of the big reasons why I've struggled within the LCMS, our denomination, and Christian circles in general. Not all Christian circles, but particularly the cradle to grave ones,
Yep.
the ones that, where you get baptized as an infant and then you kind of just are treated as if it's always been, right? That's partly why I think we have...
the people who start every other story with, when I was in Walther League.
Walther League. There are far more people that are going to listen to this that have no idea what you're talking about.
Good for them. Don't bother looking it up.
Don't even look it up.
It doesn't exist anymore.
But because I didn't grow up in the church.
Yeah.
And that was that makes it hard because you totally get the outside view. You totally understand why everyone hates us.
Yeah.
You totally understand why no one understands us. And you also really appreciate Jesus.
Yes.
like you.
That's right. And you learn an appreciation for the things that we sometimes use that inadvertently create a veil between us and Jesus. Walk into your sanctuary and look around with the eyes of someone who's never been in a place like that before.
Just the fact that you use the word sanctuary. You just lost 90% of America.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, and I'm not, it's not
no,
a criticism.
it's the language we use.
They call it at Open Arms, they've been calling it a worship center for years, right? And people kind of know what worship is, even though that's maybe a stretch in and of itself, but it's not sanctuary. And I find myself saying sanctuary because I've said it for so long. But then no, I like the worship. I like the fact that it's different. It doesn't sound churchy. It sounds a little different. And I think though we don't recognize just how deep our, the way we're communicating is entrenched in churchianity, church language, churchese, Christianese kind of thing.
Sanctuary is a place for birds.
Yeah, that's right. So I got us on a little bit of a tangent here, but hopefully it's helpful. Hope. What did you...
So we have this need, we have to be able to look forward to the future and see something that compels us forward. Something... It's been a few days since I watched the video. I don't recall Keller spending much time getting into the opposite. And how do we define
despair, you mean?
Hopelessness? What does that look like? And I think to most appreciate the idea of hope, we have to understand its counterpart. If you have had a moment of hopelessness in your life, what did that look like?
Mm-hmm.
What did that feel like? What were you experiencing in that moment?
Usually, it includes whether or not people have gone there. They've at least asked the question, why even bother? Why continue to live?
Yeah.
And that in and of itself, the fact that we associate hopelessness and despair with suicide, right? And that is a reality, you know, when people take those steps, it's hopelessness and isolation are the two things that usually go together, right? But if that's what hopelessness is, then it proves in many ways his point that we need hope. We absolutely have to have it.
That's exactly
to live.
Right. Yes.
To live.
I mean, it's got to, all the things that will pull me through today, it's got to be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Is it?
Thank you for bringing that up, because that is really powerful. Just that it makes the case.
It really does. You know, to understand one, you need to understand the other. And you know, we've all had, I think, moments at least close to or akin to hopelessness in life, where all the things, the ideas that we've built up in our heads about what tomorrow will bring, all of a sudden we start to question that.
Yeah.
It starts crumbling and coming down. You know, what if I don't get to finish this degree and I don't get this job I was hoping for? It's not going to bring me the life that I thought I was going to have. And it's just a tumbling thing, you know, that a rock slide.
Well, and when we take it kind of beyond where it really probably should go, you know, so we say, oh, well, this happened, so that means everything is...
Well, didn't we say we do that with hope? We take it beyond where it probably should go.
Yeah.
Your kid's going to be perfect angels on your vacation?
No, they're not going to be perfect angels.
It's okay.
And
they're not listening to this.
Yeah. Well, hopefully one day they will, but yeah, we need hope. And
yes.
How does he says essentially then that the hope of the Christian is grounded in the resurrection.
The resurrection of Jesus.
And this is where he starts to actually make a turn. And he actually, I think, very insightfully uses hope as the last to sort of pivot from, hey, so I'm really trying to show you what humans need and why Christianity offers it better. But now I'm sort of starting to poke that, hey, maybe I should figure out if it's actually true. And he doesn't go into a lot of depth, but he does support the resurrection. He gives just kind of a cursory, hey, you know what? The resurrection is what gives us hope, and it's what would give you hope if you believed in the historicity, the fact of the resurrection is actually how he says it.
He does a great job discussing that.
What was most powerful for you in...
Well, when he, as you used the word, he made that pivot, and he said, okay, so what is the Christian response to this need that we have? And he lands immediately on the resurrection, which is not where I thought he was going to go. I certainly agree with him, but I like the reason he went straight there. There's a lot of there are plenty of complex components that are not compartmentalized, but different pillars that support our faith. And often I think we try to talk about all of them at once, and we lead people to a conclusion about what we believe and what is so important to us about our faith that is maybe misleading. He creates a distinction. He said that, first of all, and something you mentioned earlier when we were talking, the resurrection is useless as a symbol, as something that is just metaphorical. It has really nothing to offer if it's not true. And where Christians tend to go around that is the idea of ethics. Our faith is based on this idea that the future can be provided for you by living up to this ethic. And he completely torpedoes that as a foundation for our faith. First of all, the world does not need another ethic.
Mm-hmm.
If you want good ethics, there are plenty of great religions out there.
Yeah.
And that's not that our religion does not offer an ethic, and he makes that case. It offers a very healthy ethic. But that ethic is, first of all, not something I'll ever be able to live up to. So
yeah.
I've just kind of yanked the rug out from my hope, if that's where we leave it. And Jesus doesn't leave it there, and that's why he goes to the resurrection. The resurrection is everything about this life that is wrapped up in our fears, our confusion, our hope, as well as our loss. It does not end with the grave.
Mm-hmm.
There is something that is completely outside of everything that we fear, everything that we don't even like to talk about, that exists because of Jesus and his resurrection.
Yeah, he has always talked about it in ways that I find resonate with me in a way that it goes beyond just the fact that Jesus died for me.
Right.
It goes to, what does that mean and what will it look like? And it helps prevent us from ripping the crucifixion from the resurrection.
Right.
That whole thing is one, I would say, one event.
It is.
It's the cross and the empty tomb. They go together, because if it's just the cross, then it's just some idiot that died.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's all it is.
Who didn't defend himself.
And it's the resurrection. Like, he goes through this big thing on the receipt.
Yes.
Right? Hey, this is the receipt that your sins were paid for. They do really go together. But the fact that the resurrection happened means that what the purchase was for is for something.
Right.
It's so that we can be part of this new creation, this new heavens, this new earth, the complete restoration of all things. And actually, depending on who watches this, you might actually kind of get thrown for a loop a little bit, because this is not how most Christians speak about.
Not.
I would say that it's accurate.
It's absolutely accurate.
I would say that we need more of that, and I've tried to do it the best I can, but people get freaked out a little bit.
It's difficult because it is the antithesis of what our Christian message often is. Thank goodness we don't use this hymnal anymore, but in one of our old Lutheran hymnals, there's the classic hymn, "Heaven is my home," right?
I think it is actually in the LSB.
I don't use that hymnal.
You don't use that?
No.
Okay. So ours, you mean Lutheran Church of the Pine.
Exactly. The green one, if you're familiar. But, there's this notion that, at the end, this is it, and then
it's all going to just burn up.
That's right. And that couldn't be farther from the truth,
Yeah.
What is our Christian hope? I have had this discussion with individuals and in classes recently, and sort of the conclusion that I've come to is that to look at Scripture, to look at the Bible and the narrative that it presents, it's oriented a certain way. So we've got a point A to point B, starting point and ending point, sort of. And we think of it in a very linear sense, but that's not really the way the narrative is presented. To understand the end, we have to look at the beginning, where we started in the garden, with just perfect fellowship with God and with this world that He created for us, that this amazing place that we get the privilege to experience every day. It will be fully redeemed. And that is our goal. Our goal is to get back to the garden. That's what the end of the picture is. It's very circular. And
or even to something that unbelievably could be better.
That's right.
Like that somehow all of this crap
Yeah.
will actually help make. He doesn't do that too much in this particular video, but if you listen to him in some other areas, somehow the tragedy of the fall and then everything that takes place in between and all this hopelessness that we experience at times and despair and difficulty and just kind of like, all this grief will somehow make what we eventually experience even better. The verse that I come back to for this, it may not seem like it right away, but I think it's Romans 8:18, I believe. And it's Paul, and he says, "For I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory to be revealed in us."
He describes it as a light and momentary affliction.
And
yeah,
I was actually, it kind of dawned on me sitting in a hospital room in a NICU with folks that were holding their soon-to-be, or maybe it was actually the baby was already dead, had already died, and I'm quoting that verse, and I'm saying, Holy Spirit, I don't know, like I didn't have this theologically worked out at the time, that if it gets this bad, because I was trying to tell him this sucks, and yes, he's with Jesus and all that kind of stuff, but this
is
sucks.
Not okay.
This is not okay.
No.
Yeah. And it's those moments that prove this whole heaven is my home idea to be garbage.
It
it's
absolutely is.
inadequate at best.
Yeah.
It's so much more than that. When I'm sitting there saying, if it gets this bad, think about how much better it must be. Right? So it in some ways, the pain and the misery, actually, God is, when he undoes it all, it's going to turn into something even more glorious for having sunk so low.
Yeah. And that's the, the challenge to how we think about Jesus is wrapping our head around the idea that God came into this world to say, this is not okay.
Yeah.
What you're going through, what you're dealing with, what you're facing, it's not okay. It's not okay for you, and it's not okay for me.
Yeah. It upset him enough to come, but then when you see Jesus, and if Jesus does in fact reveal the Father, reveal God, right? He is God. He reveals God perfectly. When he weeps, he's weeping alongside us, and he weeps in multiple places. We just read this in my Wednesday night class in John 11, shortest verse of the Bible. Jesus wept.
Right.
And there's so much there. Jesus is weeping alongside us in the misery. And of course, there are questions that come up. Well, why is he waiting then to do what he's promised to do? Well, I don't know exactly, but I'm not God, so I don't claim to be able to even comprehend if he could tell me. And there is hope, though, that he knows that what is to be is what will be is so good, and he wants to involve so many that maybe aren't yet.
Right.
That he's willing to wait, knowing that it's going to only make it better somehow in the end.
And, it's interesting. That, I think, is a very good explanation of a statement that Keller makes in his talk about how this message of hope that is so central to Christian faith is what allowed this body, this group of people with this faith to gain such incredible traction in the world, because it spoke to something that the lowliest masses
yes that's right
were looking for, that was not being addressed anywhere else. If we're gonna deal with hope, we have to deal with abject human misery. And everybody's experiencing it. Some people are experiencing only that.
Yeah.
How can we dare to tell people in that position that there is hope?
Yeah. Well, and especially when you're not in anything close to that.
Right.
right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
we're sitting here in a nice air-conditioned office with this fancy equipment, and
You still haven't given me any ice cream.
I offered, and you said it was too early. I didn't offer today, but if you want, there's chocolate amaretto cheesecake and cafe au lait. See, it's a coffee-based ice cream, so that counts for breakfast.
Yeah,
right?
it's too late.
No, we can. But he brings this idea up when he's talking about it. Could it possibly have been that Jesus was a great moral teacher, that this took over the world? No.
There are plenty of those out there.
There are plenty of those out there. And remember where it took hold the strongest. It was with these people in abject poverty, in these hopeless situations, in all the lowest rungs of society. They are the ones that latched onto this. And do you think it was because Jesus said, love your enemies? I mean, is that profound? Yes.
Sure.
But it comes from, you can only hear it once you have been given this promise of hope. This also, we probably should talk a little bit about the way he defends the resurrection.
Sure.
Just because you got to do that, because there are people that are going to go, wait a sec. You're talking about all this, and this is nice, but it's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
I remember fairy tales, and this is another one of them. So why should I care? But the very fact that Christianity exists, that's a defense of the reality of the resurrection, the historicity of the resurrection. The fact that thousands of Jews overnight begin to worship a man as God, whereas that would have been unheard of. Do things change? Yes. Do they change overnight like that? No.
The scripture reading that he uses for the basis of his argument in this discussion is a story that I'm sure many Christians are familiar with, and possibly some people outside of the faith.
So-called doubting Thomas.
Doubting Thomas, the disciple who was out at Taco Bell when Jesus appeared to the rest of them and didn't get to participate. And when being told that the Lord had appeared to them, he said, "No way." He said, "Not unless I can touch the nail marks in his hands, unless I can put my hand in his side where he was pierced by the spear. There's no way I'm believing this." And Jesus promptly gives him what he's asking for.
And he doesn't rebuke him either.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
Because Thomas is being much nicer about it than I probably would have been, I think,
But Thomas, as an apostle, was needed in a way that you and I aren't necessarily needed. Jesus appeared to those 12 to mark it as an historical event. And then he appeared to many others. And of course, certainly he does appear to people today.
Sure.
I don't, I've read things, I've heard things, I've seen things from people that have had those kinds of experiences. But that's not how it always works.
No.
But for Thomas, he does give it to him. And then that prompts Thomas, the rest of the disciples, apostles, and the rest of the people that got to see him, even 500 people at one time,
Sure.
Paul says.
Of course, none of those were the first people to see him.
Yes. And who were the first people to see him?
People whose testimony was completely inadmissible.
Yeah.
The women.
So if you were building a case to create a religion, you wouldn't build it on the testimony of women.
Not in that context.
Not in the first century.
No.
And so for that to have been done could only mean one thing, that it was true.
The way it is.
That's the way it happened.
Yeah.
These women actually saw it, and as crazy as y'all think women are, and as, you may not want to let them testify in court or any of these other things, but we can't lie. This is what happened, and so here it is. Jesus is alive.
And Keller points out that this is not just first century Jewish society.
It's the Roman
Empire. Women had no voice in the empire, and yet this case is being made and laid out in paper, and sent to people of all backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this is how we start.
Yeah.
With the impossible.
Yep. There's a lot more that could be said, sort of just defending it. I would listen to this if you want more. He's got, a chapter on this in The Reason for God. There's also, if you're really into deep, deep, deep theology, there is N.T. Wright, The Resurrection of the Son of God, which is a book that essentially attacks or dismantles every argument against the resurrection as a historical fact, and basically shows, I think pretty compellingly, that all of those other explanations for the start of the Christian church and for all the things that followed, they're terrible. They're irrational.
Oh, sure.
They're unreasonable.
Sure.
They take way more faith to believe than the fact that Jesus actually did rise from the grave. And he also goes into this early on that, Richard Dawkins, he quotes him and says, you don't believe anything unless you can prove it. But that's not how life works.
No, it's not.
You would have no history. You would have no ability to prove you wouldn't be able to prove that George Washington was the first president.
Sure.
Or any of the things that actually are kind of in the midst of some sort of culture war in America right now. There is a fight over the history of our country, and
there's a fight over history. There's a fight over the reality of today, and each of us, we pick sources that we trust.
Mm-hmm.
And it's how we approach pretty much every question that life presents to us today. But Keller tells us there's a better way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a better way.
Yeah.
And then this hope that is offered through the resurrection, it is not just another possible outlet for this need that we have. He makes the point that this is a very unique hope.
Yeah. What are the three things he's got? You have the personal.
It's personal, it's certain, and it's a wonderful hope. Which is another point, I guess, that could be made about the idea of hope. Hope is the expectation of what is to come. And sometimes that expectation is a more preferable outcome than others.
Yeah. He spends some time talking about this deep longing, it actually stems from a lecture or an article from J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yes.
Which means it's not from yesterday. This is something that people were struggling with a couple of generations ago. And it's this idea that if humans are progressing so much and we're getting so rational and we're depending on science so much more and we are moving into this more realistic understanding of the universe, why is it that people still fork over big bucks for fairy tales? The name of this lecture or article, whatever, was on fairy stories. And why are they still spending so much money on it? And J.R.R. Tolkien is the guy he's quoting. He says there's 5 things that human beings seem to have a deep longing for, right? They just can't seem to shake this. He says they want to be able to step outside of time. They want to be able to escape death. They want love without parting. They want to hold communion with non-human beings. And they want to see good finally triumph over evil. That's what they want. And, we see this in the Marvel universe.
Sure.
We see this in Star Wars. We see this in everything.
Yep.
These are the stories that people really want to see. And why do they want to see it? Even though we know it's not real. Even though we know, like we said earlier, that it really doesn't reflect life. Good doesn't always win. And we don't always have love without parting, and we can't escape death, at least not forever. And so why is it
But it
that
speaks
people
to something that is very real.
Yes. Yeah. It's something you brought up earlier, this idea that we remember what it used to be and maybe in a sense where we want to be or where we hope to be. He calls it a memory trace, right? We are longing for this in a world that doesn't provide it, at least not sufficiently enough. So we were originally made for it. The heart wants this, he says.
Right.
That's why we watch all the Marvel stuff, all the Star Wars stuff. And that's why it has to turn out a certain way.
That's right.
You know, there are some stories that don't turn out a certain way, and we may marvel at them, and critics may, applaud them for demonstrating the way life really is. But that's not what people want.
No.
Right? People, we want a hope that is better. We want this hope that says that it is possible, that one day it will be true, no matter how much evidence we have to the contrary right now. We need this. And then, he goes into more of the, the specifics on why it is and how it's going to happen and the Christian hope. So
it is an amazing thing. It is a wonderful hope we have. It is certain because as you brought up, we have the receipt, right?
Yeah.
That's what the kids say these days, right? We've got receipts. The death and the resurrection together show that our future was bought and paid for.
Yep.
And he also calls it a personal hope because this is where he talks about, if I remember correctly, other religious principles, describe, sort of address a hope for the future. Well, you become one with the universe again after this life. You become one with the cycle of life and the cycle of nature.
Get eaten by worms.
Exactly.
Yay.
But you, but your essence persists. Well, but for us, it's more than that. You are you in this future. You are your joys in this future. You are your longings in this future, and that is a kind of hope that truly does not exist outside of this faith, and no one's, to my knowledge, even pretending to claim that it exists.
Yeah. This personal idea, he makes a case that if it's impersonal, which a lot of other religions might say, if it's impersonal, then that means there's no love there.
Right.
And if there's no love there, then at death I'm going to lose everything that means anything to me. That love is the most important part. And what I say is, I actually did a sermon on this past Sunday on the body. That you should treat your body well. And then, of course, it was National Ice Cream Day and National Hot Dog Day, and so I've had kind of a rough week. But this idea that the Bible doesn't expressly say you need to care for this body. In fact, actually, there's a couple of places where it seems to, but then when I was looking at it for that sermon, I was like, oh, this is actually talking about more. It seems a little more complicated. I'm just going to stick with the resurrection. And the resurrection is God didn't just, raise Jesus's spirit or his essence, his soul. God raised his body. God loved his son, Jesus, and his body. And then he says that this is what I'm going to do for you. Right? 1 Corinthians 15 is all about a defense of the resurrection and what it means for us.
We wouldn't be human otherwise.
We couldn't occupy the creation.
That's right.
Without it.
Our human existence is just
anchored
inexorably,
in this body.
Yeah, it's the spiritual and the physical just wound together.
Yeah.
And by themselves, neither is the full, complete picture of what it means to be a human being.
And if Jesus had a body, and Jesus has a body right now, and as far as I can tell, will have a body when we see him again, are we just going to float around him? Like he's going to be the only embodied person? Or is 1 Corinthians 15 correct that he is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep, that we will one day awaken? And I don't know how that happens or when that happens or all those different things. All I know is I think what Keller's doing and what I'm trying to do is, the way he paints this picture of our hope in a way that makes it, I think, more real and more satisfying. There's this song, I think it's Kenny Chesney, everybody want to go to heaven. But nobody want to go now.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So it's this idea that life is good, and we're not in a rush to die.
Even as much as we complain about it.
Even as much as we complain about life. And that, I think, illustrates how deeply ingrained in us this thing for hope is. And not just hope, but this physical hope, this personal hope that he talked about, that I'm actually going to have flesh and bones. I'm going to be fully human. I'm going to be fully who I am. In fact, I'm going to be even more fully human than I am now. And I'm going to enjoy the new creation, and it's going to be free of pain and suffering and all those things, but it's not going to be because I lost my body. It's going to be because my body has been restored, redeemed and restored in Christ and in what he has planned for the future. So, I don't know. I love that stuff. I mean, I could talk forever on it, and we probably shouldn't talk forever.
Probably not. To give people an opportunity to do those readings. And if you can make it through the N.T. Wright book that you mentioned, I highly recommend the next one you pick up is another of his called Surprised by Hope.
And I was going to mention that because I realized I went way too deep on the one. And then I looked at you, and I was like, oh, no, he probably was thinking Surprised by Hope. So both of those books.
But together, yes.
The deep, deep dive is The Resurrection of the Son of God. Very dense, hard to get through, but the objective with that book is to literally pick apart every single argument against the historicity of the resurrection. Surprised by Hope is the one that I found much more easier to read, so you probably would too.
It's the comforting breeze. After making it through the wilderness.
Yeah. So lots of stuff out there. We need hope, and Jesus provides it. And I guess we can close kind of with what he says. Why wouldn't you want this to be true?
Sure.
Why wouldn't you want this to be true? And if you should want it to be true, and you do want it to be true, you should investigate if it is. You should look into some of the resources we've talked about. You should watch that video that I put in the comments. You should ask us questions.
Talk to your neighbors.
Find
out about their hope as well.
Yeah.
You could be shocked by how remarkably similar our needs are from one person to the next. And that in and of itself is evidence that humanity is longing for something that it was meant for.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, I thought of this earlier, not to go into it as we close here, but the Catholic Church actually has some pretty fascinating resources when it comes to not specifically this topic, but they have this thing called the theology of the body. And I have some folks coming in this afternoon, some Catholic folks from the Archdiocese of New Orleans that are coming in to discuss this. It's from Pope John Paul II. They have a Pope John Paul II Institute, Theology of the Body Institute, where they talk about this. This was sort of his seminal work, and he frames the whole thing with this idea that there is the original man who we were created to be, historical man, what we're stuck with, and then eschatological man, which is a big churchianity, Christianese word that basically says the thing that we're looking forward to at the end. and it's all a physical reality. It's grounded in creation. And I think there's some helpful stuff in there too that maybe I'll have to ask them a little bit about that. We're talking about the body today, but maybe I'll be able to get something in about the resurrection.
Sounds like a great resource.
Yeah, good stuff. Final words?
Final words. Yeah, I'll echo what you said. Ask questions. Continue to seek answers. If you're curious, don't be afraid of what you don't know, but look to what you're longing for, what you're hoping for, and let that guide you.
Yeah. Hallelujah. And don't let any other baggage, emotional baggage, your past, your bad experiences, your worries about what it might mean if it were true, the implications. Don't worry about any of that, because it is that good that it's worth the exploration, whatever it might mean at the end. So,
amen.
All right, y'all. Good to be with you. Hope this is helpful. God bless you. Hope to catch up with you real soon. See ya.